Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Have a seat, gentlemen. Second day of USSTRATCOM's 2019 Deterrence Symposium. Looking ahead to what we can expect in the future. We're calling this a fireside chat, as you heard said, for legislative perspectives. May not have the fire, but we certainly have the perspectives here. And my name is Rob McCartney from KETV News Watch 7. Thanks for being here. It's my honor to serve as a moderator, if you will, for tonight's discussion. I just want to give you a quick brief bio of the gentleman up here. Nebraskans will be familiar with the state's representative from the 2nd District, Congressman Don Bacon. Was first elected in 2016. He serves on the House Ag and Armed Services Committees. Before entering the political fray, Congressman Bacon served 29 and a half years. Couldn't do 30? It
was time to come home.
So, okay, 29 and a half years in the Air Force. He was wing commander in Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, and also here at the Fighting 55th at Offutt. He's deployed 4 times to the Middle East, earned the Air Force Distinguished Service Medal, 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Legion of Merits, 5 Meritorious Service Medals. He retired as a Brigadier General in 2014. Congressman Bacon, married to his high school sweetheart, outkicked his coverage, didn't he, Angie? Absolutely, outkicked his coverage. It's 4 children and 3 grandchildren, ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Don Bacon. Our second guest tonight, Congressman Jim Baird from Indiana. Congressman Baird represents Indiana's 4th District, also serves on the House Ag Committee, and also the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Congressman Baird began his service to country when he went through the ROTC program at Purdue. Then he went to OCS, Officer Candidate School, at Fort Benning and Jungle Warfare School in Panama before going to Vietnam in 1970. While there, he earned 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with a V device, and he and his unit were inducted into the U.S. Transportation Corps Hall of Fame. Congressman Baird was the 1st lieutenant when he left the military to embark on a long career in elected public service. He was county commissioner, then spent 8 years as an Indiana state representative. And then when a seat came open last year, he ran for Congress, was elected in November, and service, by the way, is a family affair for the Bairds. His son, Bo, successfully replaced his dad in the Indiana House of Representatives. These gentlemen are forward-thinking because, like Congressman Bacon, Congressman Baird also married his high school sweetheart, Denise. They have 3 children, says he likes spending time with his grandkids, working on the family farm. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Jim Baird.
Thank you. I'll have to tease him as a career politician. I know.
So we're going to have a discussion tonight, if you will. I want you to be thinking, if you have any questions, we may have a little time at the end to take a couple of your questions as well. These gentlemen have agreed to that. We're looking at domestic and international affairs, if you will. Let's start stateside. Over the past few decades, there's been a steady decline in veterans serving in Congress. How does your military experience help you better advocate for our military defense and national security strategy? And how do you think we can attract more veterans to serve in Congress? Congressman Bacon, I'll begin with you.
Well, we do see a decline in the number of veterans serving in Congress. You know, at its peak, we had like 77% of Congress was veterans. That was in the 1970s. And at its lowest point, it was in the 114th Congress. We were at 17%. Serving had any type of service at all with the military. When I got elected in the 115th Congress, we went to 19%. And then last election, we fell back a little bit. We're at 18%. So the point is, we've gone from 77% to about 18% where we're at today. And I think it shows. A lot of folks don't understand. A lot of folks who did serve and have part of that 18%, they really served maybe a short time period too. So a lot of folks don't really have tons of breadth there. But I think the military service has helped me in 2 areas. One, I understand the military issues well. I love serving on the HATS, the Armed Services Committee. And I think knowing what TRICARE is, knowing what happens when you PCS, served in NATO, served in Iraq, been in Afghanistan, been in the Far East, I think it just helps me understand these issues better. I mean, I understand the provinces in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think it helps me be a better voice on national security issues. So I think that is probably the primary difference that it makes there. I think on the other end, very partisan environment. And I find about three-quarters or four-fifths of the veterans that serve are more willing to meet in the middle and compromise and say, hey, we got to serve our country. This can't be one take all, burn and slash and burn your opponents. So I think the veterans tend to think, how can we get this done and find consensus? I'm not saying everybody's that way, but I think more so than the rest of the community writ large as an average.
Congressman Baird?
I would just add a couple of things, and I think the Congressman said it very well, but to me, the concept of being a veteran, there's a bond there that is never broken, and it continues even if you get in the legislature. And so hopefully that bond, we formed a For Country caucus. Hopefully that bond will help carry a recognition of those kind of bills that are good for this country. And we can continue to evaluate those kinds of things that are important from that standpoint. And as a veteran, I guess the bottom line I want to tell you too is that I love this country, and I know there's many of you in this audience and around the country that have given so much to protect the freedoms that we enjoy and to protect the kind of life that we live. And I'm afraid that some folks don't appreciate all of those freedoms. And I know there's a lot of white crosses across the ocean and around this world in the National Cemetery that gave an awful lot for this country. So when you get back to for those making the decision in Congress, I think those folks that have experience in the military, if you're going to commit my son or my grandson or my daughter to armed conflict, I think you ought to understand what you're doing and the consequences of that. And so I am glad to see an effort being made. I think there are more veterans running for Congress and running for other positions around the country, and I'm glad to see that. And I'll just share with you, you didn't pay for this, so you can use it however you want. But to me, the time to decide whether you want to go to war or not is before the first shot's fired. But then when that happens, then turn your military loose. You're the best trained in the world, and you have all the skills and the talents that are necessary to win. And so I think anyone making the decision to decide about what the military should or shouldn't do, I just tell you that you're the best trained and the best people in the world. And so I think we ought to get out of that position in Congress of telling you what to do. We ought to make the decision where we need to go, maybe, and get involved there. But once that decision's made, then we need to let you finish the job. And I never failed to express myself a little bit. As he said, I'm a Vietnam veteran, and we came home. There was a lot of changes in our society during that time as I went, and then as I came home. It took 30 to 40 years for some of our veterans to have the opportunity to express themselves and even talk about that war. And that was unfortunate because a lot of those soldiers really need to talk to someone, and to have the feeling when they came home that they weren't even good citizens in a way is a misfortune. What is really good about that is that today society decided that that was an error, and they are treating our veterans the way I think they ought to be treated. And so I am very happy about that. And the last thing I'd want to say is that on behalf of those Vietnam veterans, and I'm not trying to exclude any of the other branches of service, I have tremendous respect for all the World War I, World War II, all the Korea, Vietnam, and all the Afghanistan, all of those sins. But I want you to know, in my opinion, that the Vietnam veteran was every bit as good as their predecessors and all of those that have followed, and they were good soldiers. And I ended up going through OCS at Fort Benning, ended up a second lieutenant, ended up running convoys about 10 miles from the DMZ in the end. We started out down in 2 Corps. But we ran the gun trucks. That was our only means of security for those convoys. But what I want you to know is those gun trucks, when you were under ambush, their job was to go to help protect our drivers in those convoys. And I never saw one time that we had one of those soldiers on those gun trucks flinch or hesitate or refuse to go. And so that to me makes the hair kind of stand up on the back of my head, because I have such great appreciation for what they did and the courage they had. And I want you to know that, and I want your children and your grandchildren to know that, because they were good soldiers. And so I can just tell you this then, at the bottom line, I better quit, hadn't I, Don? So anyway. So the bottom line for me in all of this scenario, and I must tell you, you mentioned my wife. If it hadn't been for her, she's a nurse, and if it hadn't been for her, I probably wouldn't still be here, because she helped nurse me back. But I'll just leave you with this final thought as far as my comments. If you're on the wrong side of my flag, you're on the wrong side of me.
You're here.
Okay,
I'm with you.
Okay, going to the battle in Washington now. Fiscal realities of today, combined with a growing budget deficit, present a challenging and a constrained environment for current and future defense spending. The cost of retaining and modernizing, probably even more so importantly, the nuclear enterprise is expected to be very high. Is that cost too high? Is it too expensive to modernize our nuclear weaponry?
Do you want to start out?
Well, that goes back to what I said. I think we have to have, one of the things we did with the gun truck was deterrence. I mean, we wanted to be the biggest, baddest person on the block. And I realize compared to what you do, I mean, you're so sophisticated, I probably oughtn't to be on this stage. But the goal was similar to what you talk about in deterrence. Our goal with those gun trucks was to look so massive and big enough to suggest to our enemy that you better not attack us. But if you did attack us, what we also wanted you to know, we're going to bring all hell down on you until we could quit. So I just say that keeping our military strong, including the things that you do. I mean, there are so many things I learned today that you're involved in that I didn't know about, that it's amazing. And so to keep you strong, I don't mean to go overboard. I think we have to be efficient. I think Don and I are responsible for trying to help make sure that we're efficient in using tax dollars. But on the other hand, if we don't protect our country and protect what we have, then there's no country, and so then it's kind of pointless. So, I'm sorry.
So I came in 1985, 21 years old. My first assignment was here at SAC headquarters as a lieutenant. I ended up being the SYNCSAC intel briefer for General Chain, and General Doyle was a 2-star intel guy. And I'll give you some funny stories at some point tonight, I hope. But it was a different culture back then. You could throw things at people and yell and scream, and I saw people crying, and I was like, well, I don't know, I'm a farm boy, maybe I should become a farmer again, But my point with this would be, when we came in, we had a very modern nuclear force. I mean, our B-2s were brand new. Our Minuteman IIIs, okay, they were 20 years old. Our Ohio class was fairly new. The B-52s, okay, the youngest one was still 1962, still flying. But by and large, we had a modern, nuclear triad, with a couple exceptions, the B-52, which is still flying. But it was modern. And we were competing against the Soviet Union at the time. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, and then after the 1991, when we just thrashed Iraq like nobody's business, the 5th largest army in the world, or military in the world, we beat them like a drum. By the time we were done, there was a sense that we didn't need to invest in this anymore. We could let it go. We didn't have a threat with the Soviet Union, but that was Russia. They were going to be our friends. China wasn't a threat. So we did a vacation on this modernization thing. So we've been on a vacation, by and large, since that time frame, with some maybe minor modernization, but not much. And so and then to go at 9/11, we put a lot of money into counterterror and counterinsurgency. We stood up 60 remote pilot aircraft caps at one time. That's what we're doing. Plus, that takes a lot of money. So we invested in that area. So today we are woefully behind. We have the Minutemans are 1960s, The B-2s the stealth technology is now outdated. We need the B-21. We have the Ohio class is the end of its shelf life. We're still flying the B-52. We can't afford to not modernize. Our nuclear triad is invaluable for deterrence and for peace. Peace is our profession. We do it with the nuclear triad. And there is a pressure in the House with the majority to go to a dyad, to defund out of the ICBMs. And it's really a debate point. I think that would be a mistake. Those 400 ICBMs give us significant deterrence. Who wants to start a fight with America, at least in the nuclear realm, when we have 400 ICBMs? And they are sitting at 90-95% reliability rate. They pack a punch. So I think we can't afford not to modernize our entire triad. Now, we got to do it smartly. We can maybe get the subs and the bombers up front, get the Minuteman here in about 6, 7, 8 years or so. But we got to have it done because I think our peace and our nuclear deterrence is built on it. And if we get away from this ICBM force, we're going to be reliant on submarines, which are very important. Admiral Creedy is a submariner, and I love the subs. But we know that not all the submarines are in patrol. Some of them are in port. And our bombers today aren't on alert. And so you would have such a small force available in day-to-day use, and I think it would undermine our security and deterrence. So we have to invest in our triad. We can work on the timing and the flow, but it's got to happen.
I assume you wouldn't want to maybe you do want to write a blank check for that. And if you don't, where do you draw the line?
I think nuclear deterrence is not one that we want to cut. Now, I don't think you have to do it totally simultaneously. Right now, we're starting to produce the B-21. You may have read the first one's going to fly next year. So no secrets are being released. And I think we're going to we're investing right now in our Columbia-class submarine. We want to produce, I think, 12 of those, perhaps more. But the Minuteman doesn't have to happen right now, but we need to do the research to know what we want to do. But I think we could lay that in here in maybe 5, 6 years from now. But our country we can much higher than the price we're paying for it. But there may be some smart ways to acquire it and how we tier it in.
What is the mood in Washington right now to get that funding?
Okay, I'll start on this one. So the chairman, which is on the other side of the aisle from me, and I know he's a patriot, so I'm not making this a partisan thing. I'm just going to try to be objective and how I say it. He was going after the ICBMs up front. But in the House NDAA, or the House National Defense Authorization Bill, the majority cut 17% from the research dollars going into the ICBMs. I think it will hurt. I think by the time we get it through the Senate and we reconcile the two bills, I think we'll be back up to much better than what it is now. But there's two other areas that concern me. The majority also totally cut the low-yield nuclear weapon that we want to put on our submarines. And we've already started producing it. So to plug in, so we're going to produce this, you get the production going, and then a year into it, say, we changed our mind. It's not the right way to do business. And I think that is important, too, for different kinds of deterrence. The Russians have low-yield nukes, and we need to be able to have the ability to respond in a like manner, not an all-or-nothing approach. And so that is another area of concern. Then the third area is STRATCOM has said their requirement is for 80 nuclear pits to help make new nuclear weapons a year. The majority said only 30. And that means we can't reproduce the nuclear weapons that go in these at a rate that STRATCOM says is important. These are the chief concerns. I think by the time we get it out of the Senate, we're going to have a better bill. So I hope to vote for the Senate version.
Senator or Congressman, sorry.
I would just say that I think you mentioned a blank check. I don't think anyone's interested in doing a blank check. But by serving on the Science Committee, Science, Space, and Technology, I'm really a supporter of science, and I sense that same thing with this group here. So I think we do the science, we make the kind of progress that we want to make, and be able to perform and have the deterrence that we want out of that, because we've got the science and the technology to be able. That's where all of this came from. So I think we want to continue that. And in the science realm, we have a lot of opportunities or oversight in what we look at. It's difficult, in my opinion, to predict today what kind of science we ought to be doing research in that's going to be important 10 to 15 years down the road. But you have tremendous individuals in STRATCOM and in the military that do a great job of analyzing, predicting what we need, looking around the world. You're watching around the world to see what those needs are going to be. So I think that's where we need to focus, is trying to have the research and the backing to know what we're doing. I will have to. Can I make a personal note out of this though too?
Absolutely.
For the Hoosiers back in Indiana, we have a USS Indiana is a submarine, a nuclear-powered submarine that's just been commissioned, and then we have the USS Indianapolis that has a long history with the Navy for all the Navy folks. But in Indiana, we're very proud of that. We have the Crane Naval Base, which I think is third largest naval base in Indiana, which you wouldn't think about.
Third largest naval base, and it's in Indiana.
Yeah,
The Ohio River.
we knew what we were doing then, didn't we, Don? Anyway.
Nebraska has a Navy.
It's true. You got to control the Platte River.
So I think we continue to pursue, even in other realms. Agriculture is my background, and we got so much science and technology that's advocating or improving that. Some of which has come from our NASA and our space programs, and that even adds to what we're doing in all the different aspects of our society. So
We'll transition a little bit from domestic to international. National Defense Strategy notes a great power competition between United States, China, and Russia. China is growing, we all know this, economically, militarily. They've drawn closer to Russia in this process. Does that growing cooperation present any more or new or different concerns for our defense strategy? Congressman, I'll start with you.
no, I think you have people in this audience can answer that better than me. But I will tell you, from the China perspective, this is a couple of thoughts about China. Of course, we're having difficulty with the tariffs, and we're in Indiana, for example, and I'm not sure what Nebraska would be something similar, but 60% of our soybeans end up being exported. A lot of that ends up going to China. And so you can see the battle that we're having there from an agricultural standpoint. But I will say this, and then you got China that's investing in other countries around the world, trying to get the infrastructure or trying to get investing in ports. They have a name for it called debt. Anyway, they loan you money. They know you can't pay, probably not going to be able to pay it back as a poor country. And so the next thing you know, they own that port, or they own the infrastructure, the railroads or whatever, to be able to get those soybeans or whatever in the world market. A couple of things there. The United States has a tremendous ability to produce soybeans and other crops. And we have managed to export those to China. We have improved the standard of living of those people. And once you raise the standard of living for a people, it's hard for them to want to go back. And so what I'm trying to say is that the United States is very, very capable of producing high quality products like that. And then we have the logistics to be able to deliver it anywhere around the world. And I find that impactful on the impact that they have in the world. And so the other thing that concerns me, and I know there's a concern as a new member, we came in, we had a lot of orientation, but one of the discussions that I was involved in that does concern me, when we got like 40% of our GDP is going for interest payments, and China holds a lot of that interest. I was never able to pay for a farm by buying or borrowing more money. It just doesn't work. So I think those factors, I know we're intertwined economically, so that does intertwine us in terms of our competition around the world. And can I share one more thing? Am I taking too much, Don? I'm out of my state, so can I say anything? Anyway.
I yield.
I will say one thing I learned when I was at Purdue. We sent agronomists down to, and I'm just going to use this as an example. Maybe I won't mention the country, but we sent our agronomists to South America to teach them how to raise soybeans. And it was done for humanitarian reasons. And so 2 years later, I'm still at Purdue. I was making progress, Don. It wasn't, but anyway. Still at Purdue, and some of the professors come back from sabbatical that had been to Brazil to see how so I asked them how they were doing. And they said, well, Jimmy, the crop is doing extremely well. The problem we see is there's armed guards around those fields. So my point being, our land-grant universities, our farmers, our industrial people all contributed to the process of raising those soybeans. We almost took it down there and gave it away, and those soybeans ended up back on the world market against our own farmers. And so I just cite that as an example of what you can get into. And the only reason I cite it is because I think that gives you a feel for how I feel about our relationship with some of these countries that are trying to be a world power.
So when it comes to Russia and China, I just want to compare us to think about our friendships in the world. I see we have allies in the crowd here tonight. We are blessed. We have allies who embrace freedom, personal liberty, human dignity, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. We have allies, there's about 200 countries in the world. Our friends are the countries that embrace the same values that we have. You look at Russia and China, who are their friends? Well, they got each other right now, but of course they don't respect freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and they're allies with North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Iran. The whole point is, look, if you want to compare countries, just look at that. That's a comparison in its own right. We're blessed with that. So Russia and China, traditionally they have the conflict with each other. They don't trust each other. It goes back, centuries before us. We even saw under Stalin and Mao, they had border skirmishes in several different places along their border. It's not a natural alignment. There's a history of distrust. But right now, their number one concern is, it's all about their own self-interest. So what drives them is not human rights and human dignity and freedom. It's what is in their best interest, period. It's a self-interest. And right now, they worry about us. And so this is driving them together because we are their primary threat in their mind. We're their primary concern. So I think what concerns me in the short run, but I don't think it's a problem in the long run, is that Russia and China used to dedicate a lot of their defense budget worried about each other. They would put forces on the border, intermediate range missiles. I mean, there were things focused on each other. Right now, they're both almost primarily focused on us. So we're getting their full focus of their defense budget. So that's a concern because, it's just more that we have to be concerned about. So it is, I think, at least a short-term concern. In the end, though, Russia and China, they'll never be very tight allies.
But if they do continue down this road and they have sheer manpower, they have a lot of money that they can have access to, if they become superpowers, if you will, what does America have to do? What does the U.S. have to do to be able to compete in a multipolar world?
Mm-hmm. And it's a possibility that if they know that we're getting threats in the Far East with China, and then the Russians simultaneously probing us with the Baltics, that is a concern. We can't run a road, we can't be everywhere at once. So this is where it comes back to the importance of allies. And it's important that we have this defense budget right. We have to have a strong defense budget. And I was going to, at some point in time, I just want to just reflect where we came from. From 2010 to 2016, we cut the military budget by 18% while we're fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. We had a period of time where only half the Navy aircraft could fly. We have 58 combat brigades in the Army, only 3 were able to deploy. In the last 2 years, we increased spending by 10%. So we bought back 60% of the cuts, and we're turning that around. We cannot afford to do what we did from 2010 to 2016 ever again. Sequester hurt us badly. And so we have to ensure that we don't write a blank check, but we have to have the right levels of spending to have a very capable military second to none. So there's a balance there, I got it. But the other part of this, we have to maintain good allies. NATO is vital. Japan, Australia, I could go on and on. We can't do this on their own. I think America has to be the strong voice for freedom, but we can't do it alone. We have to be humble leaders, working with a team and good listeners, but it's a team. We can overcome Russia and China with working close with our allies because we share the same values. So I think we We got to maintain that right balance on spending and nurture strong alliances.
Do you think we're in that position, current climate, where we are nurturing strong alliances?
I would give it a mixed grade on that. I mean, on the positive side, President Trump has influenced countries to spend more for defense. So, for example, in the last 2 years, NATO has increased defense spending by $100 billion. That's huge. And that's a deterrence to Russia right there. And you could say the same with Japan, same with Australia. You could go look at, so there has been some improvements. If I had to recommend one thing, I would give more feedback in private with our allies, because I want to create better, stronger ties, and I find the style would not be mine. I would talk to prime ministers privately and praise them more in public. That's what I learned in the military.
Right. Congressman Baird, what do you think?
Well, as you mentioned, our allies are extremely important to us, and I think as a group, we're stronger because we have concepts and ideas, and we can encourage the entrepreneurial spirit, and that's the way I think we stay ahead, using the technology that we develop so that we stay ahead and become a world leader. I'd like to see us make sure that we maintain our leadership role in the world, in the science space, in the space space, and military space, and I think we draw a lot of information and talent and skills, not only internally, but from working with our allies. So I think all of that's extremely important.
You mentioned
to our
space.
Success.
What is our biggest challenge in space right now as far as defense and deterrence?
Well, the cybersecurity thing is extremely important, and I think STRATCOM's involved in trying to do that. So the other thing is the enthusiasm we had about going to the moon. I'd like to see that spirit regenerated, and if we can go back to the moon and then go on to Mars, I think that's something that we draw scientific information from that ends up being used in all aspects of our country.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. When I think of space, America is we leverage space more than anybody else. I mean, we fly 60 remote pilot aircraft simultaneously. Satellites do that. And I could go on and on. Communications, navigation, intelligence, right? But that makes us the most vulnerable to space, and that's the problem. And so we have to change the way we do. We need to build more redundancy in space, because the primary threat countries, Russia and China, know exactly what satellites carry the heavy workload, and they will be targeted on day one, along with cyber. You can take that to the bank. You just might as well count on the fact on day one, key satellites that we use and rely on will be targeted, and it will affect our allies. And and you can count that in with cyber as well. So that's going to be a 1-2 punch. So how do we defend against that? Well, I think you take satellites that have 5 or 6 mission sets on it, and you're going to go to single mission sets, so that you have 6 satellites instead of one, all in one satellite, because that complicates Russia's or China's targeting of that. But you also have to have a deterrence. And it gets back to deterrence while we're here tonight. Russia needs to know that in China that we can take care of their satellites as well, or counter with cyber, and that we don't have to necessarily counter back with the direct exact means they do. It could be a different way, but deterrence works here. But space is vulnerable because we are the most dependent on it. We use it more than anybody.
Deterrence is why we're here. Sending a message is one thing we do, the United States does more than anybody else often. And if I say one name to you, I'd like to get your reaction in regard to deterrence. Kim Jong-un.
We have to maintain economic sanctions on them, if I get your question right. 2 years ago, when I was on the HASC, I had General Milley come in, our committee. It was scary to hear his take. We were close to war. People don't realize how close we were. Some of the 3- and 4-star generals in here do. We were that close. We were sending people into the country, preparing for day one with Korea. And if you look what happens in day one of war in Korea, with all the artillery that's within range of Seoul, and the fact that the North Koreans not only have, the unclassified estimate is 60 nuclear weapons. That's at the unclassified level. They have chemical weapons. They have biological weapons. The estimates are out there, maybe 1 million killed in this conflict, and we would win, but 1 million people would die in the process. So where we're at today is much better where we're at 2 years ago. So I applaud the president for finding diplomacy to lower down that threshold, because we were close to a tragic war that we have not seen for the level of casualties in decades. But Kim Jong-un has done very little. Half-brother, he killed his girlfriend. His wife didn't care for her too much. And, but he's a nut. And he's got nukes.
Well, I just think that the unpredictability and the uncertainty in that kind of environment with that kind of leadership certainly is a tremendous challenge to our country and people like this. So the one thing you did say, Don, I really liked is we got to stay on it. Can't let up. Research.
Any questions from the crowd yet? Yes, sir. Yeah, you.
Right now, I'm in my POW train. There's a spotlight right here.
I think you can hear me. So I represent the United Kingdom. And we're very proud of our defense relationship with the United States, and in particular the nuclear relationship. And nuclear deterrence is really critical to the underpinning of NATO security. And one of the things that NATO and the US and Britain and France and the other nuclear powers, we've never done is we've never had a policy of no first use. And the reason we haven't is we wanted to keep the Russians guessing. We don't want to give them a blank check knowing they can go so far. But we've seen that Congress has started to debate this question of no first use and whether the United States should go down that route. And I wonder if you could, for the benefit of us Europeans here who really care about this, tell us a little bit about where you think that debate might go.
Do you want me to start? Or?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first, I want to thank you. I've flown with the RAF, served with you in Afghanistan and Iraq. Just writ large again, our country, we need those close alliances that we have. We're stronger together, and we have what we always call the special relationship with our British friends, and it's indeed special. So I appreciate our relationship. Get to your question about no first use. That was in the House. On the other side of the aisle, the majority is in support of a no first use policy. They said, well, who would want to start nuclear war first? I oppose, as a minority right now, that decision because saying that we're going to be doing no first use on nuclear weapons empowers our opponents to be more bold, and then they could go after us on cyber, attack our space. They could beat us conventionally. So let's say if we say no first use, period, they go move into the Baltic countries and take it over, move into Poland. What are we going to do, right? We need to have that ambiguity in their mind that we don't always have superiority in any given area conventionally, whether it's air, sea, naval, or ground, or space, but we always hold in check that we always have that possibility of using our nuclear as a deterrence here. So I think on that perspective, we should not have a no first use policy. It's a mistake. Secondly, as you just pointed out, and it's better than I could, it creates fear with our allies. Now, Great Britain has its own nuclear deterrence, so does France, but many of our allies do not, and they count on us to provide that nuclear umbrella. And if we put that policy out there, we undermine, in their minds, whether or not we will respond if they're attacked with a nuclear weapon or taken over conventionally. So I oppose it, and I think that you're absolutely right. I stand with you on that. We need you in the Armed Services Committee.
Congressman Baird, would you?
Well, I appreciate, our allies. I mentioned that earlier, but, I'm just going to close my thoughts on that is just that you've probably all heard the saying that if the big dog's laying on the porch, leave him alone. So I think that's the kind of projection that we want to make to some of our hostile enemies to say, you better think twice if you're thinking about doing something against us.
Would you vote to act first?
I said earlier that you have to spend some time to be very thorough about what you want to do and so on. So I think you've got people in this room that are able to analyze that kind of a threat and decide what we ought to do. And I would rely on their input to make that kind of decision. But then, and no soldier that I know of really ever wants to go to war. I think That's the last option. But if you're going to go, as I said earlier, you need to go with the strength that you have. So
I don't think that we would say, yes, let's strike first, but we're better off saying we're not going to never strike first. We want ambiguity. We want the Russians not to know exactly how we respond if they
what we might do, yeah.
Yeah, so if they move into the Baltics, we want them to think, oh, maybe, we don't know how this will turn out. But if we say, no, we'll never strike first, that gives them a easier lane to travel in with aggression. And I think further, it also decouples our allies, and it would say some of our allies, I mean, obviously Great Britain and France have their own nuclear deterrence, but other allies that could right now, but don't because we have that umbrella there. I think if we came out with this policy, we decouple that and then suddenly said maybe we need our own nuclear weapons. And I would just say that creates a world now where maybe 20 or 30 countries have nuclear weapons. Is that a safer world? So I think our policy of not committing on that up front is the smartest way to go. And it creates a stronger bind with our allies and it creates a little safer mindset for the Russians.
I'll throw out there Hamza bin Laden. There are reports that Osama bin Laden's son was killed. And he was, if that's true, he was considered one of the heir apparents to Al-Qaeda. Your reaction to that, if it's true, if he's dead, I've not heard confirmation one way or the other, but if he's dead, is Al-Qaeda dead?
Well, first of all, we want every Al-Qaeda leader and ISIS leader to fear for their life every day. We want them to hide without their cell phones, living in a cave, having 5 couriers in between them and somebody, because it makes it hard to live and makes it hard to operate their organization. So assuming it's true, I read the same thing tonight. I don't know if it's in fact the case. It's a great thing. And then there's going to be there'll be a follow-on leader. He needs to go too, and his successor. Same thing with ISIS. We have Umar al-Baghdadi, I can't remember his full name. That guy needs to be on the receiving end of whatever warhead we can put on him. I mean, this guy's killed hundreds of thousands of people in Syria, in Iraq. He raped an American lady. This guy is a savage guy that needs to go down hard. But if we kill him, there's going to be a replacement, and that's just the fact of life. So no, Al-Qaeda or ISIS will continue, I think, for a couple of decades until we drive the recruitment that is going on right now. And we have to go after the ideology that is used to recruit people all over the world. And we have to find a way to undermine that. And it's going to take our moderate Islamic allies to work with us on how to do that best. But in the end, the center of gravity dealing with ISIS and Al-Qaeda is the ideology that recruits people from all over the world. I mean, we just captured or interdicted 2 people from America in Arizona just getting ready to go over. So somehow they were radicalized to do that. So no, this will not end Al-Qaeda or ISIS. The war will continue.
Congressman Baird?
I think you have to constantly be aware of what successors might take over some of these countries. And so, the economic sanctions and the things that the president did in the tariffs and the renegotiating some of these kind of illustrates or demonstrates that we're not just going to take everything and that we push back. So I think that's important.
Let me ask you, gentlemen, then one final question before we get to your final thoughts. Who's our biggest adversary right now? Is it a foreign country? Is it ourselves? Is it money? Congressman Baird, I'll start with you.
I have a concern that we're going through a period in this country where we're not as cohesive as I'd like for us to be. And I think we ought to all think pretty strongly about how we handle that, because together and with our allies, but together I think we can accomplish. It's unbelievable what we can accomplish. But I'm very disappointed that we're in a situation where we're kind of decisive or divisive in this country, and I don't think that's good for our country. So, but I wouldn't say that we're our own worst enemy. I just say that we've got things we need to work on, and we probably always will have. I mean, we're a free country, a free people, and we have to go through some of these things sometimes to decide where we really want to go.
Congressman Bacon?
I tend to agree with what Congressman Baird here is saying, but just looking at internationally, I think the near-term threat, just looking at the four main countries in the
Right.
ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Russia is clearly the near-term adversary. They do not have our interests at heart. They want to undermine our interests. China is the growing country that could be the bipolar world, but they don't have to be our enemy necessarily. So I think there's opportunities to not have this adversarial relationship, more of a competitor relationship perhaps. I fear where Iran is going to be at in 10 years if they get a nuclear weapon. I don't think Israel will stand by, and it clearly is a potential for the next nuclear war. Because if you're Israel and you think Iran's developing a weapon and your existence has been threatened, they're not going to stand by idly. So that's how I sort of just see the world right now. But I think Jim's probably right. The biggest problem is I think Americans can overcome anything when we work together. And right now, what I see is gridlock and hate for each other politically in a very split political environment. And in Congress, we're not looking for consensus. We're looking for how to disagree with the other side. And it's like almost a total war politically. But that doesn't serve our country well. We need to have Congress that can figure out how to compromise on immigration and our health care costs. But right now, it's so polarized, we can't find this middle ground. And we should be able to. And so I would say our biggest threat right now, in a way, is ourselves, because we are divided. And there's a lack of, we're Americans first. And we have so much to be proud of and happy with, but yet we have turned on each other. And if we don't turn that around, I think that will weaken us in the long run and will make us more vulnerable. So I hope we get a cultural change and just a sense that we can disagree and still be Americans and love each other as Americans, but disagree politically.
Congressman Bacon, Congressman Baird, thanks very much for the discussion. Any more questions? I'm sure they'll be available for after the dinner. Thank you all for listening to the conversation. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you. Hey, Jim, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Rob, thanks. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you. Cool.
Congressman Bacon, thank you very much for sharing your time and your insights. And
thank you,
with
Admiral.
all of us sitting at the Deterrence Symposium.
Thank you very much.
Congressman Baird, thank you also for sharing all of your experience.
Thank you, sir.
We do appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
And thanks for being here tonight. We love STRATCOM. We love all the folks who serve day in and day out. Peace is your profession. Nobody does it better. And so each one of you play a role. We thank you for what you do day in and day out. Omaha, Nebraska is proud of STRATCOM. Thanks.
I appreciate the opportunity to be in Nebraska. I appreciate being on the stage with my colleague, and God bless America.
Again.
Hey, Rob, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll follow you.